Hi and welcome. Today I have kind of a bigger project for you with some collaging, and I have prepared some papers. These are the back sides of some jelly prints. So the ones where I rolled the brayer clean and I stenciled them with acrylic paint. I used paint spray and I used the crisscross stencil. I also have my little tins with paper scraps that you just saw, and what I'm also going to use is some papers from this die cuts with a view paper pad. I have this for years. I'm not sure if this is still available, but it has some nice vintagey papers in it, and they are not too thick, so they are perfect for collaging. I'm going to do a set of journaling cards or journal cards that you can use for scrapbooking, for your art journal, for your junk journal, or just you can make ATCs out of it. That just depends on the size. And I'm working on the Canson mixed media paper. It's a 200 GSM, super smooth, a little bit off-white paper, and I'm adhering the collage pieces with a glue stick. I just randomly lay the papers down. I don't have a plan in mind. I just adhere the papers and I kind of see what I like together and what not. And I just try to cover up the whole sheet with these paper pieces. I think I will speed up this process a little bit so you don't get bored, and I will be back to real time once I have glued down all my papers. The glue stick I am using is the Tombow glue stick. It's my favorite. I had never a piece that came off, and it also gives you some time to rearrange the papers if you are not happy with the result, because it has some kind of a drying time. When I'm done with adhering all the papers, I'm going to cover everything with a thin layer of clear gesso to just make it more protected and give it a cohesive surface to work on with more mixed media techniques. The papers I'm using are mainly jelly prints. Some are on all book pages, some are on rice paper, some others are on a usual printer paper. And as I showed you in the beginning, I will also use some of these papers from that design paper pad. Of course, you can use some other neutral or old vintagey papers, whatever you have laying around. I try to mix up colors a bit with a scheme that I like. I don't want to use too many different colors, so I just stick with that orangey, soft pink and a bit of a more reddish color in combination with a turquoisey and olive green. I think that is quite nice, and I try to have lighter and darker values on my page, so darker colors, lighter colors, and something in between to have a big range of color tones, and that makes it quite interesting. It also helps that I have these dark crosses on some of my papers, because these also give me contrast, and these light vintagey papers are also perfect to increase the contrast of the tonal values. I am done with my collage. I will now apply a thin layer of white gesso, no, not white, clear gesso on top of that. I really love the clear gesso. Mine is from Pipeo, and it has kind of a gritty finish once it's dry, and it takes all kinds of mediums, so you can even go on top with distress inks and they will dry on this surface. Often when you use distress inks over a kind of acrylic surface or something that is not porous, it will take every time to dry, a long time to dry, or it will never dry. So this is something I really like about the clear gesso. You are not limited afterwards in what you are using on top. And I'm applying the clear gesso with a dough scraper. This is usually meant to be used in the kitchen, but I prefer using this for applying gesso or gel medium to my projects because it's easy to clean and it gives you quite an untextured surface, because I am sometimes not a fan of brush strokes, especially when I have collage underneath. Then I like it to be not that textured on top, because I want to have the texture that I get with the papers underneath. I'm applying just a thin layer, and this gesso dries really transparent. You don't see anything afterwards. I would say it does not dull down your papers, and if it does, it doesn't do it quite much. Also, really nice thing about the clear gesso, it dries quite quickly, so you don't have to wait very long to keep on working. You can of course help the drying process a little bit by using a heat tool. To make sure that everything stays flat and does not wrinkle, I'm putting down the papers again with that scraper tool from, I think it's from Princeton. It's called Catalyst, and I really love this for collaging because you can press down the papers quite good. And what I'm doing before it's completely dry, it doesn't matter, you can do this whenever you want, but it doesn't have to be completely dry. I do some stenciling on top with our Sketchy Leaves stencils. Well, the masks of the stencils, they are quite nice for an interesting background, and I'm stenciling with similar colors onto the background, and therefore it's quite nice if the gesso is a little bit wet, not totally wet, just a little bit more sticky, then your stencil will stay in place a bit better. But of course don't let it sit there forever, just stencil down your image and then remove it. And this gives some nice texture to the background, and it also adds a second layer which adds dimension, and it blends together all these patchworky paper scraps. And with this technique I don't have to wait twice the time for drying, because I don't wait for the gesso to dry for this step. And once the acrylic paint is dry afterwards, I will cut off the overlapping edges, and then we will add another layer of paint. I'm also speeding this process up a little bit because I do quite a lot stenciling and I'm cleaning the stencils in between, and so you don't get bored. When you do stenciling, I'm using a makeup brush. I don't have any special tool for this, and when I dip the brush into the paint, I try not to overload it. I try to work it into the brush, and so I don't have much paint on the sponge, it's more in the sponge. And then you can put it onto your stencil without that it goes under it. So you get quite a good image with this technique. It also always depends a bit on the paint you're using. The more heavier the paint is, the less it will bleed underneath. The paints I am using are the Amsterdam paints, and here I mixed in some neon pink from Dale Rowney. I just mixed some colors that I thought would match my papers that I've glued down. I'm cleaning the stencils with a baby wipe afterwards. Usually I'm not that picky about acrylic paint on the stencils, especially when I do jelly printing. Then I think it's totally okay to have a thin layer of paint on it. It will not ruin your stencil. Of course, it gets used over time. When I use texture paste with the stencils, I always clean them right away, or I lay them in water until I have time to clean them, because you don't want to let dry any kind of dimensional texture on your stencil. It will ruin it and you will not be able to remove it once it's dry. Well, you maybe will be able, but it will be a harder process. I also used our scribble stencils in some areas with a bit of green. In the end, I was not a big fan of the green. I think the mixture is not that nice, but I don't really mind because I will add a third layer of a glaze on top of the whole sheet. So everything looks more cohesive in the end and has the same color tone. And with this, it does not really matter if the green is perfect or not. And here I'm adding some darker ink dots to the whole sheet, so it gets a bit more of that dark contrast that I lost because of the stenciling. Now everything is completely dry and I'm going to add a layer of acrylic glaze on top of the whole sheet. And what this does, it brings together your whole piece. It gives you the color tone that you want to have, and it also creates some depth. I'm using a transparent acrylic paint, which is more fluid. It's from Golden, the quinacridone gold, I believe. And I'm mixing it with quite a bit of water, and I also dip my brush into water because I don't want it to be too strange, too strong, not strange, too strong. I want it quite watercolory. And what's also nice, when you mix this with a lot of water, it will not be 100% permanent, and you will have the option to remove some of the glazing through a stencil afterwards to create even more texture. And you can do this with every color. You can use a cool color, you can use a pink. What's important is to use a transparent acrylic paint. You can see this on the acrylic paint. There is always kind of an icon which shows if it's transparent, semi-transparent, or opaque. And there, use a transparent paint, mix it with water, and just add some glazing on top. And here I go in with the bigger ink dot stencil, and I'm removing some of that quinacridone gold color, and that gives me another really nice and interesting layer. And this technique makes a totally different piece of paper. It's much more cohesive. It looks like as if it's one sheet of paper and not something you have glued together. And here I'm using these leaf stencils, which are matching the leaves that I stenciled before, and I just remove a bit more of that glazing. I will now cut everything apart, and here you can see my 6 journal cards that I got out of this paper. You can of course use a viewfinder to find the perfect piece on your paper, but I wanted to have as much cards as possible, and so I cut just 6 out of them. I used a die from Sizzix. Of course, you can just use a normal paper cutter, cut the cards to size, And if you want to, you can round the edges with a corner rounder. In my next step, I'm going to do some stamping with different kinds of mixed media stamps. I will link up all the stamps I'm using today in the video description. And I'm using StazOn ink as I'm working on an acrylic surface. It's the best ink, I think. It dries the fastest, and that is what matters. If you're using VersaFine Clear, it might take a long time to dry. And here I'm also working mainly intuitively. I see where something might be missing on the card, and there I would stamp something. And also I turn the cards around if I think they look better in the other direction. I think that's kind of a fun part, is decorating these cards with some more images on the background. I don't plan to adhere main images to these cards. Of course you can if you want to. I just will add some sentiments in the end. As always, I have a blog post for this project over on my blog with some photos of the finished cards, so you can have a closer look at them. And as we're talking about blogging, I don't know if you know that we have a shop blog where we post daily new projects with tutorials, inspiration, ideas on mixed media, paper crafting, card making, with our stamps and stencils. And I will link it up in the video description. Maybe you want to check it out because it's a lot of free creative inspiration in case you need some ideas. We are also running a monthly mood board challenge with the theme Anything Goes. You might use our mood board as inspiration, but you don't have to. And the only restriction for the challenge is that you are using at least one of our products, a stencil or stamp. Not both, one is good. And you have to post your make either in our Facebook group, which I will link up below, or you just post it over on Instagram, tag Rubber Dance and use the hashtag Rubber Dance Moodboard, and then we will find you and you will be in the draw for a €10 discount to our store. Often we don't have many entries. We only draw a winner when we have a certain amount of entries. But if we don't draw a winner in 1 month and then we put the whole people that were joining to the next month, so you will be in the next draw, then you don't lose the chance to win the discount code. I think I'm done with the stamping. I want to add a little bit more of collage here and there for more dimension and interest. And I'm using the same papers that I've used in the beginning to create the whole sheet. And what I'm also going to do is I want to ink up the edges of the cards with a dark color. I'm using black, or maybe it's stone gray. I don't have it in mind. It might be stone gray, so it's not as dark as black. I'm using StazOn because of the drying. I would not recommend using distress inks here because I have this stenciling on top with acrylics and they might not dry on them. And if necessary, I'm cutting off the overlapping edges that I've just gotten because of the collage elements I added. And to finish up the cards, I'm going to place a sentiment on each of the cards and I will show them to you at the end in the photos. The sentiments are from our Mix Sentiment 2023 stamp set. It's a really fun and nice stamp set to create your own sentiments with 4 big blocks with birds, and you can stamp them and then cut them out and use them to build sentiments for your art journals, journaling, artist trading cards, whatever you want. Before I will leave you with the finished cards and some photos, I'm going to make some splatters over the cards with a light color. I'm picking the ivory ink from Schminke. I have to mention that these inks from Schminke are not good. The pipette is already in the bottle, and that happened with almost every ink I have. And they are also absolutely not transparent. They are all quite opaque and milky. Well, of course, white has to be milky, but I'm talking also about the others. And they are not very cheap. They are quite expensive, and I would always go for Liquitex inks. Also, I'm quite happy about the Sennelier, but I only have one color from Sennelier, so I can't recommend them in case of the other colors. But I have a lot of Liquitex here, and I really like them. They are quite nice, and they are transparent and really fluid, and you can create watercolor effects with them. I let these splatters dry. I will add my sentiments, and I will show you the photos. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope we will see us next time. Bye!